But this was the case as well in the February Revolution. Everybody supports it. It's only the Tsar. Only the Tsar was the only people. It was just a bit wrong. It's a new system now. Everybody's come together to create this new system. And clearly then, that's when the arguments in revolution happen. See, even now in Indonesia, all the time this happens. This is when the arguments take place. This is when the euphoria sort of starts to break down. In fact, in the case of the Russian Revolution, where the Bolsheviks looking back to the French Revolution, almost uncanny that it was almost exactly the same. Just as in the French Revolution, one of the turning points was a demonstration at a place called the Champ de Mars, where the soldiers, the National Guard, fired on demonstrators. Similarly, actually, a place that was even called the Mars Field, had exactly the same name. The provisional government got troops to fire on people who were demonstrating for the 8-hour day and so on. So it was uncanny the way that it was unfolding, the way that the arguments were exploding and so on. And everything about the history of the Bolshevik leaders would tell you that a coup was not really what they were about. That they weren't planning to just have their own little revolution apart from society. Not incidentally the idea that you would get from this film, Nicholas and Alexandra, not a particularly brilliant film, but I always remember there's one little scene in it, and of course they go to great lengths to get the historical detail here. And I'm sure, there's probably somebody who spent a month trying to find exactly what buttons the Cossacks wore or something like that to get absolutely everything right. And then there's a scene in, I think it's supposed to be in about 1908, something like that. Lenin and Trotsky are writing a newspaper, and Trotsky shows the text of something he's written, an article he's written to Lenin in this little... But Lenin, it's the truth. And Lenin says, screws the thing up, throws it on the floor and says, when are you ever going to learn, Trotsky? It doesn't matter whether it's the truth or not. Lies, bombs, it doesn't matter what we use, as long as it gets us power. Now, Lenin and Trotsky would not even have been in the same room. They didn't meet over that period. That's complete rubbish. The idea that, that this is the sort of speech that he would make, and also the idea that Trotsky was this naive chap in this relationship, doesn't really stand up to a great deal of historical scrutiny, I don't think. But that's the sort of the Hollywood idea, if you like. In fact, everything about their history told you exactly the opposite. Trotsky, for example, in My Life, writes about when he was a student and when he was in his first socialist group, and he describes a conversation he had with his friend. They've started off this group. He says, I was walking along the street with Grigory Sokolovsky. It's about time we started, I said. Yes, it's about time, he answered. We must find workers and step to it, I said. Yes, said Sokolovsky, I think we can. I used to know one. He's a watchman in a Bible sect. Why don't we look him up? Now, that does not, to me, sound like the attitude of someone who's going to step outside the working class, desperate to find them. Lenin, even more the case. Lenin rejected, not quite in the mechanistic way that the Stalinists would have you believe, but Lenin rejected the ideas of his brother. His brother was hung for taking part in an assassination to kill the old Tsar. Lenin, over a period of years, sort of wrestled with these ideas and rejected that idea that a coup could be the way, round the back of the sort of masses, if you like, it was the way to bring about socialism. Spent years sort of writing leaflets and so on and smuggling them into factories. What is to be done, the book that sort of set out how he felt that a socialist movement should be, was all about sort of making contacts with the working class and so on. His organisation smuggled leaflets in the most extraordinary way across all sorts of difficulties and obstacles into working class areas. None of it really suggesting that he was talking about anything other than trying to build an organisation of the masses. And then there's something else as well that they noticed really when they look back. When Lenin and Trotsky and the Bolshevik leaders looked back to previous revolutions, that there was something, although there were a great many similarities, there was one key difference between the Russian Revolution and the French Revolution, which is this, that the French Revolution was led by the Jacobins. Ultimately, they were the most radical people in the French Revolution by far. They were the people who were determined to prosecute the revolution to its logical end. However, they represented a minority class, the most radical wing of the bourgeoisie. Therefore, of course, there was an element of coup in it. I mean, it was a mass uprising, of course. But of course, there was an element of the things that a minority has to do if it's going to achieve power over the majority. A workers' revolution is something very different. Because the working class are in the majority. And therefore the Soviets, they said, these Soviets that had been thrown up these organisations that have been thrown up by the February Revolution, they are the organisations of the masses, the organisations of the majority, not a minority round the back of the majority, completely the opposite, the majority. These are the organisations which can transform society and build a new socialist society. Completely the other way round. Trotsky actually even went further because he said, all right, the working class is not the class which is in the majority in Russia. However, if you look at it in a worldwide sense, then we're in a different position to the French Revolution, because the weak links really in the chains of international capitalism is an international system. Therefore, a revolution in Russia, even in a backward country like Russia, can spark off revolutions throughout the rest of the world. And therefore, you're in a sort of different equation, because in a world sense, of course, the working class are in the immense majority and do have the capability, do have the potential to run society. Therefore, a completely different view of revolution to the bourgeois revolutionary idea, the idea that a minority could control society. Then there's something else really that says to you that it's really unlikely that the Bolshevik Revolution in October was a coup, which is the events of July in 1917. Because in July 1917 there were massive demonstrations over, again, to do mostly with the war. It was quite clear that the provisional government was prosecuting the war as far as it could. There were massive demonstrations in which there were calls from a great many people in Petrograd, in fact from most of the leading working class areas in Petrograd, to take power. We're sick of the provisional government, down with the provisional government. Miliukov had actually ended up having to retire as a result of the scandals around the war and so on, and a new provisional government was formed, this time with the socialists giving it a sort of left cover and respectability. The Mensheviks, not the Bolsheviks obviously, but the Mensheviks and so on, they went into the provisional government. And so then, at this point, there was the cry went up from a great many people, down with the provisional government, and there were immense calls from people. Look, now, this is a problem that would be quite a nice problem to have, wouldn't it? What a brilliant problem. Loads of people hold power here. Yes, we possibly could take power in Petrograd, but look throughout the rest of Russia. The masses are not in a position. We don't have the control of the Soviets. The people who are being elected to the leadership of the Soviets, maybe not in Petrograd, but elsewhere, are still those people in the other organisations, the people that still believe that there's some sort of reform, some sort of deal that we can, maybe another provisional government. The Bolshevik idea of socialism is not the one that's winning. Therefore, because the mass of the working class at this point does not agree with overthrowing the provisional government, therefore, not just as a moral argument, it wasn't, oh dear, well we need to tot up the votes and see who's winning. It wasn't a moral argument. It was one that says we can't hold power in that way. Marx, after all, no, they were Marxists, these people. Marx talked about the essential nature in a revolution of mass activity, not just as for sort of democratic niceties, but because, as he put it, only in the course of the revolution, only in the process of the revolution, do the mass of working class people change. Only in the process of revolution do working class people learn the lessons of organisation, learn the lessons about how people that, in Russia's case, Jews, for instance, are not our enemy, but the Jewish working class person is our brother, our sister, and so on. All these things, throwing off the crap of ages, as he talked it. Only in the process of revolution can that happen. In the July days, they were faced with this sort of piece of theory in a very practical way. No, if we take power now, that process hasn't gone far enough for us to be able to Now, they weren't just being cowardly here, because the Bolsheviks took part in the massive July demonstrations. They said, we will stand with you, however, we are not going to take power.